Welcome back, everybody. At the end of the last episode, we did some paving and I showed you my new K-truck. In today's episode, we're going to be working on the gate posts. The first step was to remove all the coverings, which stop the rain from getting down inside them. After mixing up a new batch of mortar, it was time to start laying the blocks. This mortar is made from a mixture of 1 part Portland cement with 2 parts of sand. I had some issues previously where the mortar would go off too quickly, and so after doing a bit of research I discovered that adding Coca-Cola or dishwashing soap actually enables the cement to stay usable for a longer period of time. Every so often I'm checking that the blocks are level and straight. The last thing I need is a post that isn't straight to hang a gate on. And here's the first post nearly completed. I've still got to put concrete down inside the actual blocks themselves and cut off the rebar from the top. Now, I didn't want to bore you with more of the same, so here's a few shots of the completed posts. Like I said, I've still got to cut the rebar from the top and make the caps. The caps will hopefully look something like this, made from concrete of course. So I need to make a wooden mould into which to pour the concrete form. After working out the size and the angles involved, I was able to then produce this drawing on the computer. This shows where the concrete will sit. It's obviously a side view. I then made up a cut list for the pieces that are needed. Some of it can be just scrap wood. Some of it needs to be done from 12mm ply. The first part to make is the frame around the outside. As for the carpentry tools I'll be using, I was very lucky that a very close friend of my wife gave us these big long clamps and a Delta 10-inch bandsaw. Delta, in case you're unaware, is an American brand. A joiner surface planer, again made by Delta. As well as a 9-inch disc and belt sander, again by the same company. A router table. A planer. It's a benchtop planer. And what I've always known as a Hegner saw, some people call it a mini jigsaw. I was also given this European style workbench. I already have a miter saw. This is a 10-inch miter saw, and my regular planer, as well as a table saw. This is a job site table saw. It's folded up at the moment. As you can see, it's on legs and wheels to make it movable. I was also given a fixed Delta table saw. Anyway, let's get on to planing some scrap wood to make that frame. Time to start cutting the pieces into miters on the ends. You're probably wondering why I didn't use the big miter saw just to the left of the shot here. It's not actually set up yet, and unfortunately some of these scrap pieces had what looked like tiny pin nails. I took most of them out, but I was a bit concerned that there may be some remaining, so I didn't want to damage the blade. The blade I'm using is a Japanese pull saw, also inherited, but it's very old and not very sharp. It's just a case really of measuring, marking and then cutting. Once all the pieces were cut, it was just a case of making sure that they were at 90 degrees to each other, putting some screws in just to connect them together. Next up, it was time to make the outer wall parts for the post caps. For this, I'm using a panel of what's called con pane or panel coat. You'll see it has an orange surface on the other side, which is often used for making up concrete formers and general construction work. To cutting the pieces to size, I was able to then test fit them on the frame. You don't have to be perfect for this, it's only for the concrete mould. I then screwed the frame itself to another piece of scrap plywood. This will keep it flat on the bottom and make it easier to move around. Once this was done, I was then able to cut the lengths I needed to make the frame walls and start attaching them. This was simply a case of drilling through the side walls and attaching them to the frame with construction screws. Coming up onto the bench now to save my poor back, I'm able to just go around and attach all of the sides to the main frame. Once all four sides were attached, it was just a case of going around the inside edge a little with a sanding block. This type of wood, because it's made from very kind of cheap ply, has a tendency to split and crack. so I didn't really want splinters running along the edge. And the outer walls attached. And time to put the edge pieces back in. They shouldn't really need attaching, and because of the angles I really don't want to make too much work going around with screws, which then I have to cover up and would leave an impression in the final mould. And here you see the pieces in place. It's not perfect, but it's good enough. Just checking that the center actually fits. I'm not going to push it all the way in. I want it to be a tight fit, but if I push it in, I've got a feeling I won't get it out again. Now, if you look closely, you'll notice there are some very, very small gaps around the edges, which of course I'll have to deal with later. They're only about 1 or 2 mil wide, so it's not such a big problem. Now the centerpiece also needs this tube in the center. This will be where the electrical wires will run through the block up into the lamps. This tube part will be made from the same impact resistant conduit I used to run the cable to the posts themselves. So I'm just taking some measurements on how long it needs to be, or a minimum length I should say. It doesn't actually matter if this conduit stays in the concrete post cap or if it comes out, as long as it leaves a hole there for the cables to run through to the lamps. Then it was just a case of using the same pipe cutter as I had used before, just to cut it to the correct length. Marking the center. And drilling a hole to hold the tubing in place. And then using a high temperature glue gun to hold it in place. Once that had cooled, it was then time to just push that in place. It's a kind of push fit, nice and tight, so it should be fine. And a quick shot of it all in place. Next up, it was just time to seal any small gaps with some silicone caulking. Smooth it out and remove any kind of excess. Now, because these post caps are actually quite thin, the concrete itself will need some reinforcement. So I have this leftover steel mesh, which I used for making the base to the gate posts. So it's just a case of marking the length and then cutting it with the angle grinder. Then just checking the position and marking and cutting a second piece. These two pieces can overlap, that's not a problem. Then putting these into position, I just had to make sure that none of this wire mesh pokes out from the sides of the concrete at all. These two pieces are then joined together. Just need to use some wire, and each of them is basically twisted and tightened. Any loose edges kind of cut off later. We don't want those poking out of the concrete either. And here it is, ready to go. The following morning, after moving the mould outside, I gave the mould itself a quick spray with WD-40. Here it's called 556 for some reason, but it's basically to help the concrete come out of the mould easily. It's like a non-stick layer, really. And after mixing up a batch of concrete, it's just a case of shoveling it in. I was a bit worried about the wire mesh actually sinking in the concrete, but as it turned out, the mixture was quite hard already, so it was just a case of laying the mesh on top and continuing with the concrete, trying to remove as many air pockets, I guess you could say, as possible, and just kept going until it was full. Once the mould was full, I was able to smooth it out a bit, bring it up to the edges, and then using a small hammer, just went around lightly tapping the sides a few times. This allows any air bubbles trapped in the concrete to float to the surface. Off camera, I turned in the edges just a little, as sharp edges with concrete tend to break off very easily. Let's see how it looks next week. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed that. If you're interested in seeing more, please click on the subscribe button below, make comments and likes as per usual. Have a great day.